A few years ago, I owned and operated my own pet grooming salon. Because it was a business that was open to the public, I typically didn't keep the front door locked while I was working. One day, a new neighbor who had just moved into the complex came to my door. He introduced himself and told me he was opening a meat shop in one of the units nearby. At first, I was completely friendly. He was a new neighbor, and I figured it was nice to welcome him to the complex. He came inside and started making conversation, but the questions quickly became more personal than I expected. He asked me if I worked alone. I told him that I was alone at the moment, but that my work partner was currently on lunch and would be back in about 20 minutes. This was a lie. I was alone. Then he asked if I had a boyfriend, then whether I lived with my family. Looking back, those questions make me uncomfortable in a way they didn't at the time. After talking for a few minutes, he asked me if I'd like to see his new meat shop. I thought sure, why not? He was my new neighbor, after all, and I was trying to be friendly, so I followed him over. When we walked inside, there was almost nothing there. The place was completely empty aside from 3 enormous chest freezers in one room. They were massive, easily big enough for me to fit inside. The other room contained a walk-in refrigerator/freezer, but there was no meat. Not a single package. Nothing. He started telling me about the meat he was supposedly going to be selling, and then asked if I wanted to look inside one of the chest freezers because apparently there was a good deal on meat. I immediately said no. I remember thinking it was strange because there wasn't even any meat in the store yet. Then he asked if I wanted to see the basement. I said no. He asked again. I said no again. I had absolutely no interest in going into a basement with a man I'd met minutes earlier, especially when I was alone and his new business was essentially an empty building containing several enormous freezers. But he kept trying to convince me to go downstairs. At that point, every alarm bell in my head was going off. I started making my way back toward the exit, and eventually I managed to get out of there. Nothing happened to me. I made it back to my grooming salon safely, and my landlord eventually returned. She lived in the basement of the unit I was renting. That made me feel safe once again, but I've thought about that encounter many times since. I don't know what was in that basement. I don't know why he was so interested in getting me down there. I don't know why he needed to know whether I lived alone, whether I had a boyfriend, or whether I worked by myself. And I certainly don't know why he wanted me looking inside an enormous empty chest freezer in a business that didn't contain a single piece of meat. Maybe there was a completely innocent explanation for everything. Maybe he was just an incredibly socially awkward guy with a strange way of welcoming his new neighbor. But I'll never know. What I do know is that I was very, very glad I told him my coworker was coming back in 20 minutes. Because when I think about that encounter now, I can't help wondering what might have happened if I'd told him I worked completely alone. This happened 10 years ago when I was 18, but I think about this all the time and feel like I finally have a place to share my creepy encounter. I was a cashier at our local grocery store in Southern Illinois. Small town, less than 2,000 people. Our semi-driver arrived with our truck about 30 minutes to close. I don't know his name, but can describe him as a 55 to 60-year-old white man with a pot belly. I'm bringing in some outside store merch, and the driver approached me and asked me to look at his leg. He said it was injured and was making hurt noises. I don't know how to describe it other than clench your teeth together and breathe in fast. He's pulling up his pant leg and says, "See that? Can you see that? Get closer. Come take a look at it." And I'm like, "Huh, yeah, that sucks." I see nothing, and it's nighttime. I try to go back to my task, and he seems more annoyed and urgent. He's saying, "Come look at my leg," in a demanding way. At this point, I notice I'm actually standing close enough to the store's awning. It has lights, and notice that I'm in a pretty well-lit spot. He, however, is conveniently right at the cutoff where the light stops, so it's dark where he's standing. I say to him, "I'm going to school for art. I don't know anything about medical stuff." I then, again, try going back to my task. He stops me again and says, "Just come over here and look at it." At this point, he's pretty fed up with me. His persistence really irked me, and I said, "I can call you an ambulance." Immediately, his tone changes to, "No, no, no, I don't need that more pain noises. I just need you to look at it." I just ignore him and do my task at this point because I'm starting to fall behind on closing duties due to this conversation. A woman walks up to me once I'm inside and says, "That man is faking an injury." I laughed and said, "I thought he was, but I didn't want to be rude." And she looks me in the eyes and again says, "He's faking an injury." Her seriousness made me more uncomfortable, like I might be in danger. But am I really? I mean, I'm at work. I still have more things to bring inside, so I'm forced to go back out, and he's still there. He starts up again when he sees me, and this time I say, "I'm not allowed to be off camera." Not true. Also, I was in fact currently off camera, but he didn't know. I see his eyes widen, and he starts looking up left and right, clearly scanning for a camera. He says there's cameras out here, and takes 2 unnaturally huge steps backwards. Those huge steps made my stomach turn. After taking his steps back, he's still talking at me, wanting me to see his leg. I tell him he's in the dark. I can't see even if I go over there. I tell him to come inside where there is light. I said this because we have one of those TV cameras that you can see yourself walking into the store positioned at the entrance. If he came inside, I would have him on camera, which I really felt like I needed at the time. I also was still testing him to see if he would go on camera after that first camera reaction. He hesitated. Then I watched his eyes look at the entrance TV camera before he asked if it records. It does. I say, "Yeah, we have a lot of theft." He said something like, "That's a smart idea to have then." Then I remind him we sell Tylenol inside. He doesn't want to go inside. I do. I lock the door behind me. I never see him again. A man with swollen red eyes stepped out of a house I had never seen him enter before, grabbed my top, and started touching his zipper while telling me to come inside for tea. 2 hours later, the police found only a young couple living there, who had never seen him in their lives. For context, I live in a small city in France. My parents own a pub in a quiet neighborhood right in front of a train station. My parents have had this pub for 4 years, so we almost never have new customers. I sometimes help my parents making drinks and stuff, so I always see the same faces every day. It's like a second family. But one day, a new customer arrives, someone we've never seen before. My parents were busy with other customers, so I decided to take his order. When going towards him to greet him, I noticed his eyes were really red and swollen, and his face too. So I thought he cried before coming, which made me feel sorry for him, so I tried to be a little softer despite being in a rush. But I noticed when taking his order that he speaks really weirdly, like being drunk. I look more at him and see that he struggles to stay up. He was like swinging his legs and shaking. So I called my parents, told them I cannot serve him his drink because he is already drunk. So my dad said, "Sorry, we cannot serve drunk people. Please come back another time or later in the day," while being smiley. But the guy started getting angry and started speaking unclearly and very loudly, so my dad kicked him out. For 1 week, we haven't seen him. 1 week later, I was alone at the pub. My mom was grocery shopping and my dad was cleaning up the floor. It was quiet, so I had time to talk with customers. And while talking to one, I had a feeling of being observed. So I turned my head, and nothing. I look around and no one was there. I wait for a bit and then same feeling. So I quickly turned my head and saw the drunk customer just standing there looking at me. He then left. So I talked to my parents later at night after this. They tell me that it's weird. The neighborhood is small, so we know everyone. My dad checked the cameras, and the drunk guy was indeed staring at me through the window earlier. This is when it starts getting weird. One day I was on my usual walk. I always walk on the same route because it brings you to a forest and there are plenty of dogs. I also love to sit on the bench and talk to old people. I'm so used to this route that I see the same persons during every walk. But this time when walking, I heard footsteps behind me, so I turned down the volume of my headphones and looked above my shoulder and saw the customer. This time, he was walking normally. So politely, I smile at him, but I still have a bad feeling. My stomach started to knot. He suddenly stops me. Keep in mind that I wasn't in the forest yet. I was in the in-between where there is absolutely no one. He kept coming closer to my face. I wanted to slap him, but I was too scared, and he just said, "Are you a Christian?" To which I answered that yes, I was. He suddenly backed up and said, "May God always protect you," and gave me a paper with this exact thing written. I ran back home. When I arrived, I told my mom what happened, and she said the guy came to the pub a few minutes earlier to ask my mom to join his church. My mom said that I shouldn't worry, that he is just a drunk weirdo obsessed with religion. We haven't seen him later for 1 month. During this time, me and my parents walked around the neighborhood to maybe check if that guy was a new neighbor that just moved here. But when talking to our neighbors, they said they didn't see who we were talking about. He has really recognizable features, as he is almost red with swollen red eyes. But this day, March 24th, 2024, the worst-case scenario almost happened, which was also my last encounter with this guy. It was a very hot day. I was just done with my school day. I live 10 minutes away from my high school, so it's quite quick to go back home walking. But for some reasons, I didn't feel like going back home, not because of the weather, but because I had the same knots in my stomach as a month earlier, but still decided to walk to my house. I had such a bad feeling I decided to not put any music. I walk for 5 minutes and arrive in my neighborhood, so I feel reassured. I remember telling myself, "Okay, you know this alley by heart. You are safe now." I kept walking, but then someone steps from their house really quickly that they almost tripped on me. I turn around to see if they are okay, and it's the guy. With teary eyes, really dark and red. He had a light smirk. He tells me, "Come inside." I froze, said no, I have to leave. He said, "Come inside. I have tea." So I start walking away, but he slightly grabbed my top, and he kept touching his zipper. Terrified, I really couldn't move. I still try to get my phone to call someone, but suddenly the guy goes back in the house. I look around and my dad was running towards me. I started tearing up, saying how scared I was. We got home together and immediately got in the car to go to the police station. I described the guy. He showed me some pictures and I couldn't identify him. The policeman said they will go knock at his house. I gave him the address. A few days later, I didn't have any news, so I called. What he told me made me have extreme goosebumps. 2 hours after I left, they went to the guy's house, and the one who opened the door was a young woman. The young woman explained she lived here with her husband. They are both Africans. So she got scared and said, "I don't even know who you are talking about, nor how this guy got into my house." I was 16 years old, barefoot on sharp rocks halfway around a forbidden island, when I realized the old man smiling up at me from the water below wasn't in pain at all, and that he was trying to pull me down. So this story took place when I, currently 22 male, was only 16. It's important for this story to note that I looked like a very young 16-year-old. I'm kinda short, At this point, I've got no whisper of facial hair on my face, and I have a very young-looking face and body overall. I live in France in the Paris suburbs, but every year it was kind of a ritual for me and my grandparents to go on vacation in Brittany during summer near the coast, every time a different location. It's also important to point out that my grandparents were already pretty old at this point, so I was used to doing things like hiking or going to the beach alone when it was too far away, as I didn't want them to be exhausted all the time. So this time we were staying in a little holiday resort near the sea, so my grandparents could easily go read on the beach if they wanted to while I was swimming or going on adventures alone. From the first day, I got myself really interested in a small island that you could see from the beach, and I talked to some locals about it. They told me how beautiful it was and that you could take a ferry to go there, but just a small portion of the island was authorized. And there was even a whole beach that was not visible from the coast, and that was in that forbidden area. When I asked them about it, they said that the police technically forbids people to go to the part of the island that's not visible from the coast, as to go to this side you either have to swim in deep water or climb rocks. There also are no roads for police cars to drive onto this side of the island, so if you have a problem, they can't really get to you as quickly. But they also told me that many people don't care and go to this side, even if it's forbidden, because the beach there is bigger and there are fewer people. From there, that was it for my 16-year-old self. I wanted to go to this island. So the next morning I told my grandparents about it. They first said no because they were afraid I couldn't make it before the last ferry, but I reassured them that I would do my best to take the second to last ferry, so if I missed it I would just have to wait for the last one. They then said yes. So, after a morning exploring the town with my grandparents, I finally got on the ferry and arrived at the island at around 4 p.m. The last ferry to get back to the coast was around 7:30 p.m. I immediately searched for the first beach, the legal one, from which you could climb or swim to the other one. And there I was, climbing barefoot on sharp-edged, burning stones on a hot day. The first thing I figured is that, contrary to what I was told, the water wasn't deep at all. In fact, I just chose to climb because I was dumb and irresponsible, but if I chose to walk around the island in the water, I could have. I'm kinda short for a guy, and the water would have just got a half my torso. The second thing is that there sometimes were micro beaches fragmenting the climbing wall. Not big at all, just a couple square meters, but enough to stop the climbing for 3 or 4 seconds and set foot to the ground before returning to climbing. And the last micro beach, which was actually midway to the forbidden beach, was bigger than the others and had some sort of a little cave. Not really deep, maybe 3 meters deep, but just enough so you don't see much of the texture of the walls because of the darkness, if that makes sense. I arrived at the forbidden beach, and as I was told, there were not many people. Mostly teenagers in groups of friends and couples in their 20s lying next to each other on beach towels. I stayed there for about 45 minutes swimming and laying in the sand, doing whatever when I saw an old man who seemed to suffer from severe back pain considering his slowness, arched posture, and hands placed on his lower back. I naturally said hi to him as he walked past me and smiled, and didn't really think about it, because it was natural for me to say hi to an old man who seemed to be in pain. He nodded like a nice grandpa and continued walking. Then I gathered my stuff back from the beach and prepared myself to leave when I noticed he stared at me from a distance and seemed to try to gauge if I came with friends or not. He saw I noticed him and strangely smiled, and I said hi to him again, trying to make the situation less awkward and move on. From there, the real nightmare begins. I start climbing back to the rocks, heading to the legal beach. At first, all seems normal, but after like 5 minutes of climbing, I notice some noise behind me. little rocks dropping in the water below, and faint breathing. So I look back and see nothing at first, but as I stay still I see him, the old man climbing behind me from a 5-meter distance. I completely freeze, surprised to see him here, and I say, "Hi." Again, I know that's kind of ridiculous at this point, but I've always been such an introvert I don't know what to say, lol. But this time he responds something that could translate as, "Oh, you're such a polite little boy, aren't you?" And he smiles at me with the strangest smile I've seen from an old man. And then I go back climbing faster, not saying anything and not realizing at first what's happening when I remember. Wasn't this old creep arching his back like crazy just 10 minutes ago? And also, to go to the forbidden beach in the first place, you either have to climb rocks or walk in relatively deep water. That's why there were only young people on that beach. How would an old man in pain even be here? As I realize that, I notice he is getting closer, so I accelerate even more. After some time, I see him climbing down, so I figure it is too much for his old body and get kinda relieved. But then I notice him placing himself right below me in the water, trying to grab my feet to pull me down with him. Mind you, all the time I'm too stunned to move, seeing this man in his 60s trying to pull me down to his level in the water to do God knows what with me. It's when I began climbing again after what seemed like an eternity, shaking, that I notice him stopping to try to grab my feet and just following me with open arms in my direction, seemingly hoping that I would fall off the wall into his arms. Then I start climbing again, trying to ignore what's happening below me, and I don't exactly know when, but I stop seeing him, and I get really scared that he might have climbed back to get me. And at the same time, I notice I'm near the micro beach with a tiny cave, and I'll soon have to get to the ground to start climbing forward. So I go to the edge before descending to the ground. It was not really an edge, but more of a really gradual slope, to be honest. And something feels off. There is something in the cave. It's him. He has thrown away his clothes, and he looks directly at me, smiling, completely naked, telling me with his hands to come to him. At this point, I'm really fucking scared. He may be old, but he is taller than me. I'm weak as fuck, and I don't know what to do, cause my only way forward is there, and I'm terrified of missing my ferry back to the coast and to my grandparents, and having to sleep on that island where I have no money for the only little hotel I've seen and where I know nobody. So I decide to go back as fast as I can to find anybody, really. He tries to follow me back on the rocks at first, saying shit like, "Come on, little one. Come to me," but I'm going really fast, and after 30 seconds or so I don't hear him anymore. So it means either he has another plan or he just gave up chasing me. Now I'm back on the forbidden beach. I find a random couple and I explain the situation and ask if I can stay with them because I don't feel safe. They tell me, "Yes, you can stay if you want, but we won't pretend we're your parents or help you find a house to sleep in though." And they don't even seem to believe me, but at this point I don't care. I ask them if they're going to take the ferry too. They tell me that they are, and basically from there I never talk to them again. I just follow them in silence to the ferry and finally get the last one. When I got back to the resort, I didn't tell my grandparents right away. Instead, I called my friends on a group chat, laughing it off and minimizing the incident as if it were just a funny, weird story. But I can tell by their reaction that it clearly was not just a funny story and that something horrible could have happened to me. And just then I realize how truly terrified of this situation I even were. Now everybody in my family kinda knows that story, and sadly, I've come to realize that almost everyone I know has a creepy story like this to some extent, which I find really sad and upsetting. But yeah, that was the story of when I met this old man at the beach in Brittany.